The next session is going to be a spotlight conversation hosted by Cristina Cileacu, journalist at Digi24, answering an almost rhetoric question, I would say. Are we witnessing an era of unpredictability once again? And Cristina's guest, Lord McConnell, is going to share important insights on this topic. Cristina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mirela. Okay, good to go. Hello, everyone. As Mirela already said, we are trying during this conversation to find some answers together with Right Honorable Lord Jack McConnell. Thank you, sir, for being with us. For the question, are we entering a new global instability era? And if so, who is driving it? What forces? And you once said, in one of your speeches, that a politician must know what they believe in and also why they do what they do. How can we apply that in a world that is changing every minute, not every day, not every week, but every minute, literally?
Well, what a place to start. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and to contribute to this session. I think there are three main drivers of the global instability that we see just now. It's not just that we've had a pandemic. It's not just that we have climate change and other major changes happening across the world economically. And it's not just the rise of strong authoritarian leaders in some parts of the world and our response to that. I think part of what is happening is a battle for natural resources, limited natural resources, and those who have bad motives being ahead of those who have good motives in that battle, and seeing the need to engage with it. I think secondly, there's been a big change, particularly in the democratic world, away from what was previously a politics dominated by class, between the workers and the owners of capital and industry, to a politics of identity that I think the mainstream politicians have been very, very slow to understand and adapt to. And then thirdly, I think we live in an age where, because of the nature of our interactions, the rise of the internet and the social media, where it is easier to accentuate division and to use division in that context. And all of that then creates, at the national level, challenges and instability that are then exaggerated globally.
Well, as you said before we started this conversation, it's time for a free for all. How is this translated in politics? Because in politics you have to have rules. Nowadays, seems that rules are for the slow ones, as you said, not for the quick ones.
Well, I think those of us who believe in rules and who believe in evidence-based solutions, but also believe in values. I was very struck by what President Jana said earlier about the battle of ideas. I think I would add to that a battle of values. Those of us who believe in good values, I think were for too long naive and complacent about the changes that were taking place. And therefore, those who have a different set of values and who want to benefit from a free-for-all and exploit that situation, either militarily or economically, or even socially in some cases, that they were maybe a decade ahead of those who have better values. And I think, so we're now in a situation, unfortunately, I think, where those of us who believe in rules, who believe in respect, who believe in evidence and evidence-based solutions, I think we're in a catch-up situation, and we need to get real very quickly. We need to be very strong and direct in that. I remember 20 years ago, for example, meeting President Putin. I first met him in 2003, when the whole world was trying to get him involved in the broad consensus of progressive internationalism. I think, looking back on it, we were dreaming. And I think one of the things I recall from that conversation was it was just after the Americans had entered Baghdad in Iraq, following the intervention in Iraq. And I asked him how that intervention might change the political and diplomatic relationships with the Middle East. And he smiled and said, "This is very good for Russia. When America is unpopular, it's very good for Russia."
And he was
So while
right.
the West was trying to get him on board, he was thinking strategically years ahead. And we have just been too slow to catch up.
We have always looked upon United States because, of course, whatever United States does affect us in Europe. And we have, of course, the second mandate of President Trump. Some of people like him, some don't. For sure, he's unpredictable, and also for sure, he's a disruptor. Do we need this type of personality when it comes to the management of the United States, to the leadership of United States, in order to survive these changes? Or he is the one that, not him personally, but his team provoking all these changes?
Well, I think he and his team are much better organized and prepared for their second term than they were for their first term. And I think on both occasions, both in 2016 and in 2024, the rest of the world was very unprepared. Didn't quite believe that he was going to win, and didn't quite believe he was going to win again. And therefore, I think, again, we're playing catch-up. And his team, they're happy to disrupt the global diplomatic relationships, and they're certainly very happy to disrupt politics and the way things are done, or have been done, inside America. But they're also very keen to disrupt the international economic system as well. And the tariffs are only one part of that. And we can see this now, I think, constantly over the next 4 years. And I think our response to this has to be to respect and encourage when something good happens from the White House, which it will happen from time to time, but also to be ready and to be strong and to be independent when the White House is going in the wrong direction. And I think the main message coming out of the election of President Trump and his movement is that Europe, and it's not just Europe, Japan, South Korea, the other big democracies of the world, the democratic alliance of the world, can no longer automatically rely on the United States. And we need to be strong enough in our values and in our messaging. And if anything, we need to compete with President Trump on that. You know, he succeeds because he's very direct, he's very clear, people know what he stands for, even if he's unpredictable. He talks straight. He's occasionally funny. And people like that. And they want our leaders to be as strong and direct and personable and driven and fast as he is. He makes things happen. They happen quickly. And in our systems, we live in an age in the 21st century where we cannot work as slowly in leadership as we were able to work in the 20th century. We have to be faster, more dynamic, more energetic.
But can you balance keeping the rules as well, being fast enough in order to compete with the rest of the world that doesn't actually respect the rules and work by their means and their wishes?
I think the first battle is to win the battle of ideas and the battle of values. And respect for the rules will follow from that. I think the rules probably need to be more flexible. We need to be more agile. I think we probably need to respect more the national identity of citizens. I think as those of us who believe in internationalism and understand the interdependence of the world and want to see a world where we're all cooperating to solve the big problems that we face, I think far too many of us diminished national identity and people's core, their immediate, their family, their community, their village, their heritage. And I think we need to be much more respectful of national identity within that overall international framework. But I do think that if we can win the battle of values, if we don't see this as a battle between just Europe and the United States or Russia, if we see this as a global movement of those countries who genuinely believe in democracy and tolerance and international cooperation and so on, and the rule of law, and we bring in Japan and South Korea and a number of other places around the world that are keen to work with us, both at the big power level and the middle power level, which I think was a point that was made earlier, then I think we can build the alliances that can win this war. Because the war is not just on the battlefields of eastern Ukraine. The war is in our minds, and it's in our, and through our values. And we need to be as strong, as strident, even more so maybe, than our opponents in taking that on.
Well, in these times when crises overlap, literally, we see that new alliances and new actors resurface or appear in the world, and let's say, medium powers, the countries like Turkey, like Brazil, India, play also an important role. How shall we see them in this big picture? Do they help us to remain stable, or on the contrary?
Well, I think we need to be very strategic, and we need to have a. When I say we, I mean, you know, those of us in Europe, including even the UK, perhaps still in Europe.
You're still in Europe, yeah.
But elsewhere in the world, I think we need to be both more strategic, but also smarter in the way that we tackle these challenges. You know, in any one of these rising or middle power countries, there are different forces. So in some cases, India will be a strong ally. In other aspects, we might look at what happens in India and be very concerned about that, particularly the relationship with Russia. In some cases, Turkey will be a strong ally. But we look at some of the things that Turkey has done in recent years in the Middle East, and we should worry about that. So we need, and similarly, some of the South American countries, South Africa, many of these countries should be automatic allies of the democratic alliance around the world, but sometimes they have strategic objectives in the regions that drive them in a different direction. And so I think there are two responses to that. One is to work closely with them and to pursue their friendship, not just be relaxed about it. And the second, I think, is to, strengthen the regional responsibility for people's actions. I think we have an international ecosystem of institutions that is based on, in some cases, on the 1945 settlement, which is now 80 years out of date, and in other cases is built on a sort of immediate reaction to the end of the Cold War and the changes in Eastern Europe in around 1990. And I don't think we have really looked at how we need to adapt those institutions. And my view is that in a world of over 190 independent countries, and the scale of international intervention that you require, cooperation together, size of these organizations, that having global organizations that are a little bit divorced from the population is probably not sustainable in the 21st century. And we maybe need to look to a more regional level, multilateral cooperation, where across the regions of the African Union, the Middle East, and the Arab League, ASEAN and Southeast Asia, the South American, Latin American countries, that the regions and the bigger players in the region take more responsibility for local conflicts, take more responsibility for climate change in that area, and that we stop relying on agreements that are made globally but never actually implemented.
Also, there is another fragmentation we observe during our century, and that is the political ideology fragmentation. So the liberal, socialism, and so on, does not really works anymore. People turn towards what you mentioned earlier, towards nationalism and personal identity. Will this fragmentation have a big impact upon us on a long term?
I think it already has. Yes, I think it already has had a big impact, and I think moderate politicians on the right and on the left, particularly in Europe, but also in North America, maybe even in some of the Asian democracies as well, they didn't really see this coming. I work on a peace process in the Philippines. Mm-hmm. I go there maybe twice a year to support that process. And I was there in 2015 when the presidential election was taking place. And they had had a series of mainstream politicians become their president since they overthrew the Marcos dictatorship in the 1980s. And a guy called Duterte, that people may have heard of, who was the mayor of the big city in the south, Davao, He was regarded as an outside candidate for the presidency. And he didn't just win the presidency, but he won it on a landslide against all the mainstream higher-level figures. And that happened before Trump was elected in America. It happened before a number of others in Indonesia and elsewhere were all being elected as so-called populists, maybe more authoritarian rule breakers, were getting elected. And so this is a movement that's happening throughout the world. And I think that the mainstream politicians of left and right have, I think, become a bit complacent, a bit distanced from the population. It looks like there's maybe one rule for them, one life for them, different life for the people that they represent. And I think there's a need for politics around the world, not just to deal with this issue of identity and respect it more, but also to be more engaged and more humble with the population. And until we do that, I think we're going to have a problem, because these other characters are connecting in a much more successful way.
And because we don't have much time, it has to be the last question. What shall we do? How can we survive in this instability? Because all of us talk here about stability, and all of us definitely want stability, but in the meantime, we don't see it enough.
Well, I would say two things about that, and one's, I hope, very positive. I think we have a big challenge, and I worry when I see, for example, the debates around reacting to President Trump and his attitude to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, being about Europe having to stand together and to take up the responsibility. There are countries elsewhere in the world, not least Japan, but UAE and others as well, who've contributed to the effort in Ukraine over the last few years. And I think there is the makings there of a democratic alliance of countries that can grow, and it should be aggressive in its advocacy of the values that we stand for, not complacent and nervous about pushing them. Those who want to run the world in a different way are aggressive and on the front foot, and we need to get on the front foot as well and counter that. But secondly, I think we need to be a little bit more positive as well. There are more girls going to school around the world than there have ever been. There's more people getting vaccinations and living healthy lives than there have ever been. Less children dying of diseases that are avoidable. There are more stronger economies that are not depending on aid than there have ever been. And power around the world might be being torn apart by these authoritarian regimes and the chaos that surrounds that just now. But that does mean that there are more centres of power around the world on the good side too. And it's not just down to Britain and France sitting on the Security Council trying to stand up to Russia, China, or even sometimes America. We're all in this together, and there are more of us. And I think it's time for us to stand firm on that and to see the hope in what we're doing and the success that we've had so far, and not just be put off by the challenges.
So we have to stay united, in the same time to have our national identity and to fight with the guys that don't respect the rules. That could be the conclusion of our discussion today.
Simples.
If I may, one more question. How do we get here? Because we talk about the effect and the what we see now, but what causes that?
Oh, I thought long and hard on this. I was First Minister 20 years ago when, in 2005, the world seemed to be doing lots of very sensible things. We had agreed the responsibility to protect doctrine globally that was a response to the genocides and the horrors of the 1990s. We were making real progress on the Millennium Development Goals and the North-South relationships in the world. We were expanding the European Union to here and elsewhere. People had more freedom of movement. 10 years ago, we had the Sustainable Development Goals agreed at the United Nations, and some serious conflict prevention going on. And now we're in this state of absolute chaos. I do think we need to take some responsibility for it. I think in the aftermath of the collapse of the wall and the changes in Europe in around 1990 and the early 1990s, I think there was this belief that the cause of liberal democracy was going to dominate forever. And we were now in a world where that had been accepted and there was not going to be any problems anymore. And all we had to do was persuade people like President Putin to come and join us. And I think we were naive, complacent, a bit out of touch. I think the public across a lot of the democracies could smell that from their politicians, and they want change. And at the moment, a lot of them are going for the wrong kind of change. And we need to be that change. We need to be the people offering them a hope that's very direct, that delivers change in their communities, gives them hope for their families, and stands up for them at home and abroad. And if we do that, we can combat this disintegration.
Thank you so much. We'll keep this idea. Lord McConnell, thank you everyone for being with us.